Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen. I'm joined by my usual broadcast partner, former NHL defenseman Tom Laidlaw. Played 11 seasons for the New York Rangers and Los Angeles Kings. This is the Laidlaw and Allen Report. Come to you twice a week to talk all things hockey and a few other things. Today, if you hear a whirling noise, that's my 91-year-old neighbor who's out in 84 degrees blowing off the leaves out of his yard. So, and that's why he's 91.
Yep, keeps moving. He keeps moving.
Keeps moving. That's exactly right. But it doesn't matter how hot it is. When it needs to, his leaves need to be blown, he blows them.
So, all right, that's great. I like that.
Yeah, for sure. Let's start. It really hasn't been all that entertaining. The last game wasn't the Stanley Cup final. But I have a question for you. I saw something on social media, and I was actually kind of disappointed to read this. But someone asked whether or not the Tampa Bay Lightning's actually, he didn't ask the question. He said that the Tampa Bay Lightning's legacy will be tarnished if they continue to be hammered by the Colorado Avalanche. What do you think about that statement?
No, not a bit. I mean, they've won, and in this era, they talk about in this era all the time. So this salary cap era, it's much harder to keep teams together. You've seen so often where Chicago won years ago, they had to trade away some players, get under the cap. Tampa has had to do that, and they still won 2 cups in a row and got to a third. So they've gone to the finals 3 years in a row with a great hockey team. And Colorado's just Colorado's going to be the next dynasty. There's some other good teams out there, but if they keep their team together, they'll be another dynasty as well. So no, I don't think it's. I love what Tampa has become. They went from losing 4 straight in the first round to Columbus 4 years ago. Then they learned how to win. They've come back in games all the time. Their record up until the Rangers series of rebounding after losses in the playoff was perfect, 17-0. They've done so many great things. The way they win, the way they've learned with less talent to fight back in games, fight back in series. So they'll go down as, again, in the salary cap era, one of the best teams over the last 20, 25 years. I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, and boy here. Okay. Yeah, I don't think it impacts them at all.
Yeah.
I was really kind of surprised by that, to be honest with you. That they would suggest that because, as I've talked about before, the Lightning have run the most difficult gauntlet in Stanley Cup final history. I mean, all 4 of their opponents have had 110 points or more. No one's faced the level of competition that they have. And they've run into a team that's just playing great hockey. The Lightning were more competitive in game 1 than they were in game 2. In game 2, even in game 1, John Cooper said the better team won.
Yeah.
And game 2, there was really no. They just weren't in that game. So they've got to pull it together. There's no doubt.
Yeah. Were you surprised if Vasilevsky was left in the game?
Yeah, I was actually.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe Cooper knows Vasilevsky better than we do.
Right.
So maybe that's his thing. I don't know. Some goalies don't like that the skate of shame that goes when they get pulled out of the net and you pass the goalie and he thumps you on the pad. Some goalies just hate that.
Yeah.
They'd rather stand in there, or if you're going to pull me at the end of the period, so it's just a different goalie. You could have done that. So I don't know why he didn't do it. I didn't see the post game, to be honest with you, to know if anybody asked him about that.
I didn't either. Yeah, and I guess they could have pulled him after the second period. Then they don't have to make that skate of shame. But maybe he thought, well, we're not out of it yet entirely. It doesn't look good.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to pull him in the middle of the third period.
Yeah. And again, I would guess that Cooper has a pretty good handle on how Vasilevsky feels about those things. And, you owe it to Vasilevsky to kind of do it the way he wants it done. Maybe he's one of those guys that say, hey, this is I'm part of this team, and if we're getting hammered, I need to stay in there with my boys,
He does seem to be that kind of team guy. I mean, that record he has or had 17-0 after the losses in the playoffs shows that he takes that very seriously, right? That, I let the guys down, the team just wasn't good enough, and we're coming back the next game. So,
yeah, but Susan is circling around what is an NHL tradition is when your goalie's getting hammered, even when it's not his fault, you don't let him suffer through it.
And usually, I agree with you. I think in Vasilevsky's case, you do have to go to him and ask him what he wants to do in that situation. But a lot of coaches in other cases, they don't leave it up to the goaltender. They're going to decide when they pull the goaltender.
Yeah, I would say most of them will do that. I would argue that Vasilevsky is a special case.
Yeah, I agree.
It's kind of like one size doesn't fit all with some players. Like, when we've talked about this, Blake, I think you talk to Connor McDavid about whether you re-sign Evander Kane.
Yeah.
You would, yeah, exactly. But there are on certain teams you wouldn't ask anybody; you just go ahead and do it.
And you know the story better than I do. I think from doing the book. Didn't Wayne Gretzky? Weren't they going to fire Robbie Ftorek at one point during the season? He did not want that to happen.
He did not. He did not want that to happen because that's not who Wayne Gretzky is. Wayne Gretzky did not want Robbie Ftorek to be fired on the basis of having a disagreement with Wayne Gretzky. And, the issue is that he benched Wayne Gretzky for a display of anger. I
was there. I was there for that,
yeah. He slammed a stick over a crossbar and broke it after a goal was given up. And did Robbie think that he was mad at the goalie or?
No, Mark Fitzpatrick, I think, was a young goalie, and he was coming in. They were just a young kid. I think we had a shutout. We were shutting out Detroit in Detroit, and Wayne turned the puck over in the neutral zone, I believe, and then Detroit went down and scored. So Wayne was more mad at himself that he ruined the shutout for the young kid. And so, he was mad, but mad at himself, and then broke the stick.
Yeah, but my question is what did Robbie think he was mad about? Did he know what he was?
I don't think Robbie cared. Robbie had a rule where if you lost your temper and did something like breaking your stick on the ice, he was going to bench you. That's what the rule was.
Okay.
I remember sitting it was funny because we had a veteran team: Larry Robinson, Dave Taylor, myself, John Tonelli, a whole bunch of veterans guys, and we're sitting in the locker room, and the rumor started going around the locker room that Robbie was going to bench Wayne, and we were like little kids, we're like, no, this just can't happen. You can't do that, and we almost wanted to see if he was going to do it just for the fun of it because it just didn't happen like that. So we went out for the third period, and Wayne was sitting on the bench. I think it was Mike Krushelinski leaned back to Robbie at one point and said to him, "Says Robbie, you've got to put him on the ice." But at that point, the damage had already been done, and they had a confrontation. So the old Detroit locker rooms, the cinder block walls and everything. And if you go down to the visitors' locker room, there's like 3 or 4 other locker rooms on the way down to it. And Wayne took Robbie into another locker room. I think he felt like they were insulated there. Nobody's going to hear the conversation. And Wayne yelled to Robbie, 20,000 people came to watch me play. They didn't come here to watch you coach.
That's how it went. And, just to add to the story, Bruce McNall then flew to Calgary, which was where their next game was. And everyone assumed he came to fire Ftorek, but Bernie Nichols said that Wayne did not want Robbie Ftorek fired.
It would have looked like Wayne was running the team at that point. He did not want that.
He did not want that. And Wayne's a classy guy. You know what I mean? Like he may not have appreciated what Robbie Ftorek did, but he didn't want to cost him his livelihood at that point. So,
and the thing with Robbie, I think Wayne understood Robbie, didn't agree with it, but Robbie's way was his way. He was going to treat everybody on the team the same way. I respected that totally, but it's Wayne Gretzky, so it's a different story.
Yeah. Speaking of his way, I saw something yesterday. I thought about you. I was watching the Detroit Tigers game yesterday after golf. I golfed with my son on Father's Day and my wife. The great Cecil Fielder, who also had a tour of duty with the New York Yankees. I think your New York following will remember him as well. Yep. But he hit 50 home runs in a season. Once hit a ball out of Tiger Stadium, which only 4 right-handers had ever done. And he's pretty beloved in Detroit. And he was given the Willie Horton Award yesterday. And so because of that, he was in the booth with his buddy, Jack Morris, the Hall of Fame pitcher. And as soon as they got in the booth, they started going after one another the way that you do on your show. And I thought, it's just not a hockey thing. It is a baseball, because you would have sworn these guys were in high school. Not, I mean, the way they were just jabbing one another and giving each other business. And, they started talking about how Cecil Fielder had done against Jack Morris, and he was 6 for 24, and Fielder said, yeah, but I hit 6 home runs off you, or whatever it was. So, that was actually 3 home runs. But anyway, I thought about that, and I had said before that, I had seen that through the years covering the league, that when guys get together after they're done playing, it's almost, it reminds me of kind of the military, where they had a camaraderie that's kind of hard to describe. But it does remind me of like kind of a high school locker room.
Oh, totally.
That's what we saw on our television screens yesterday, was Cecil Fielder and Jack Morris talking about they were just back in 1990 again.
That's
so
funny. But speaking of that, Bob Nystrom and I used to play against each other all the time. In fact, he knocked me out and put me in the hospital one time with concussion, playing a playoff series. And he was good friends with Clark Gillies, obviously teammates of Clark. And we kind of became friendly with Clark. Had him on the show before we lost him. And somebody had hooked me up with Bob Nystrom, one of our followers. I was Ira, I believe it was. So I called Bob Nystrom on Saturday, and he called me back. We had a great conversation, but it's the same thing. It's like we'd known each other for 40 years. I think we'd had one other conversation at a charity event, and it was just great. I've always had a ton of respect for him, even though he knocked me out. I just thought he was one of those guys who got everything out of his career and won the 4 Stanley Cups with the Islanders. And he's doing well. I guess he's out in Colorado doing a lot of outdoor stuff, really keeping himself in shape. So it was just good to talk to him.
Yeah, that's the kind of conversation that a civilian doesn't understand. Even though he knocked me out, I had a lot of respect for him.
I guess that's true. I never thought of that, but that's true.
You don't see that in the banking world or the business world. So anyway, I wanted to bring up too. I read there's been a lot of discussion about how there's a lot of trade talks about Jeff Petrie. And Pierre LeBrun said there were 5 or 6 teams in on it. And then I saw this morning that one of those teams that was identified, and I can't speak to the validity of the source, because it certainly wasn't my source, but they said the Rangers were in on that as well. Now, I don't know if they are or they aren't, but certainly they want to make some changes on the defense. But is Jeff Petrie the kind of guy they should go after, Tom?
I don't think so. I think what they lack is a little bit more like that old Jeff Bukaboon kind of guy, a good solid player, but a little bit more physical. I think that may be happening more because of the familiarity there. Jeff Gorton, the president or assistant, is he assistant president of operations there? Obviously was the general manager here with the Rangers. So maybe him and Chris Drury got along well enough and continue to, that they feel comfortable talking to each other. But yeah, I wouldn't be the guy that I think that would make sense for the Rangers to go after. But
yeah, I mean, Petrie's a guy that's known a little more for offense than defense. But he's also 34 years old, and he's got a big ticket. Three more years at $6 million and change. I would see. To me, I would be looking for more of a shutdown guy. Like, you got to prevent chances. You got to take the pressure off Igor a little bit. So
I also think it's more forwards they need to have. I don't think it's see, they got those young defensemen. Keandre Miller is going to have another year of experience. Trouba played fantastic. Obviously, Fox is the Norris Trophy winner from 2 years ago. Lindgren was just a warrior out there for them. Maybe like another fifth or sixth defenseman. But then they've got the other young defenseman there too that's pretty good. So I would be surprised. I'm not saying they couldn't use another defenseman, but I don't think it's going to be a $6 million defenseman. It's more like a $2 million defenseman they'd want. It's a 5th, 6th, 7th defenseman. But
well, I think they will get a defenseman as well. I don't know where it fits. I mean, I agree with your assessment of on the surface, but one of the things that a GM once said to me, he said, we may not need a 3-4, but if we add a 3, that 4 becomes our 5, and then we're a pretty good team.
Yeah.
So,
Very true. Yeah.
so I mean, there's a possibility in that regard as well. But anyway, again, I mean, there's 5 or 6 teams in it. Who knows whether it was just a passing conversation between the Rangers? It's really hard to know. Although I think they will go out and try to improve both defensively and they'll make some changes up front as well. You never want to stand pat. You always want to keep.
They're right up against it on the cap now, aren't they?
Yeah, they're pushing it now. So.
Schneider's that other young defenseman. Thanks, Anthony. That I really like with the Rangers, and again, he was just a rookie too, so he's going to get better. But yeah, I hear.
Yeah,
you
when I watched the Rangers, sometimes I had the impression Gallant was not a big fan of his.
Of who's?
Of Schneider.
The rub on supposedly on Gallant, I don't necessarily notice it, but a lot of people talk about it. Is that he just is hard on young players? He doesn't have a whole lot of patience. And obviously Schneider's like that. And plus, as a defenseman, like he was getting probably so as Fox and Lindgren were, I guess you are with the Chuba and Condor Miller at some points were the top, those were the top 4 defensemen. And typically they're going to get, north of 20 minutes of ice time. And then that 5th or 6th pair is getting down like 15 minutes of ice time. Sometimes you don't get into the game as much with that. You understand it. It's not that there's, they're doing something wrong to the young player like Schneider. But, ideally, when you're a defenseman, you want to play anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes. You really get in the game much more. So I think it was like I give him a lot of credit. And he was a young player, not getting big minutes, but still, he made his mistakes, but he still, I thought was a pretty reliable physical player for them, too. So.
Yeah.
Hey, I saw your guy. You got you're running the Vegas Golden Knights now. You got your guy Dadonov traded to Montreal.
I'm running the Golden Knights. Yeah. Well, I mean, I knew they were going to trade Dadonov, but I think the funniest thing of all about that was the tweet from the Anaheim Ducks after that trade occurred. He said, the Ducks put out a thing that said, "For sure."
Oh, that's right. Because he got traded to Anaheim before. That's right.
Yeah, he did, and then that was. And actually had gotten to the city and everything. And
I didn't know it went that far. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it did for sure. So, and you knew that was going to happen. I mean, they were, and obviously that's a big trade for them. That'll give them more cap space. That's the Tampa Bay Lightning way. They're increasing their long-term IR. Although Cap Friendly put something out, and maybe you could explain this more. It's not something I had ever considered before, but as an agent, maybe you did. Cap Friendly pointed out that when you use LTIR, that when you send players down to the minors, you can't prorate that it's the full hit. And so that's why teams that use LTIR a lot, end up with overages. That they've got to deal with the following year. So even though it seems like it's a really good deal, there's some negative to it as well. So
I guess that's made because they don't want young players being forced down into minors for cap reasons.
Right. But I had never really considered that. But we just think, you got this coupon that allows you to kind of go over the cap, and it's true. I mean, the Vegas Golden Knights will be able to use that now. And they probably don't have to trade. Pacioretty. I think they'll still have to move somebody, but because they have a bunch of lesser paid players that they have to sign, and they'll need money for that as well. But that's still a good deal for them.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I guess it gets rid of the problem. So now technically they're fine. They don't have to do that.
Well, they still have to do something because they're trying to sign Brian Smith, and they have 4 or 5 other players. Now, not big time players, but guys that you got to give $1.5 million to or 1.7, and if you got 3 or 4 of those, it's one. Bruce McDonald once said to me, $1 million here, $1 million there. Pretty soon, you're talking about real money. So,
Bruce. What do you think of Pacioretty as a player?
Well, I like him. He gets hurt a lot. He just seems. But I think I've always thought that's his bad luck. But he scores a lot of goals.
Yeah, no, that's what I think too. But he always seems to be the odd man out, right? There was the captain in Montreal, but they wanted to get rid of him. Here, he goes to Vegas, and it's like his name is constantly coming up. Will get traded. It's Are
you going to move him onto the squad with Duchesne.
No, see, I wouldn't, because I think he gives out an effort. I think he's a good, hard player, but that's why I'm kind of wondering, like, why is he always the odd man out? Is Eichel a win? Is it winner or whiner?
Yeah. He's feeding India, Tom. He knows, of course, that you do not like Jack Eichel as a player. So,
well, I'd like to phrase that another way. I would like to see, for Jack Eichel's sake, that he can look back, 10, 15, 20 years from now and say that he got the most out of his contract or out of his career. Yeah. I just think he's going to be one of those guys that's going to look back and go, man, I mean, I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe he's going to be happy he's made a lot of money. I just don't see that he is, you look at the Sidney Crosbys, the Nathan McKinnons, the Makars, and I know those are elite players, but it isn't just the skill, it's the way they approach the game, the professionalism. I just, from a distance, don't see that from Michael, based on the way he's spoken, the time he went back into Buffalo and the stuff he said and the way he handled everything. And again, Buffalo certainly has to shoulder some of the blame as well. But I just, it's the way that all went down in Buffalo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, how do we feel about Duchesne in Nashville now? Is he back in your good graces?
No, he's not. I mean, because how many years did he have there where he just did nothing? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like, okay, now you're showing us you can do it. But I guess, listen, it's maybe he matured. Maybe, now we'll see next year if he can continue doing what he did this past season or more of it. Then, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's bothered me how Jack Eichel has carried himself. I got to know him when he was a young player. And out of that American program, most of those kids that have come out of there are, the Dylan Larkin, Matthews, who I knew pretty well. They're all really good guys. And Larkin says Eichel's a good guy. They're friends, but there was an edge to Eichel that you didn't see with the other players. So I could see where, he may not say and do all the right things, but I think as a player, I think he, I would certainly want him. Like, he has been a very consistent offensive player, except when he was hurt.
Yeah. I mean, talent-wise, no question, but I just, maybe it's a maturing thing. Maybe he gets settled into Vegas.
Yeah. And there's more to a player. I mean, Tom, you're right. I mean, there's more to a player than just numbers, but his numbers have been very good. And I always use this argument, when people say that, like Joe Thornton wasn't a winner, or they would say, okay, so if you put Joe Thornton on this Colorado Avalanche team, would they not win? And I would say the same thing. If you put Jack Eichel on this team, would they not win because he's on their team?
Well, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a strong enough locker room. I would, and again, I don't even know the young man. It just appears that he is one of those guys that sits in the locker room, and locker room changes. The dynamic in the locker room changes. That's from a distance. So. Yeah,
and there are plenty of players who have said the wrong thing at times, who play pretty hard. Marchand. Brad Marchand doesn't always do the right thing.
And, I know, yeah. He's going to have it for licking people.
And I think everybody in the league would want him on their team. So
Tom Wilson's the same way in Washington. All the times he gets suspended and stuff he does, but
that's a different type of situation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the draft. That'll be coming up here, and we've alluded to in the past about what a roll of the dice the draft can be, and it's fascinating to me because you often hear teams that are trying to rebuild to say, and their PR departments trumpet the fact that they've accumulated 10, 12 draft picks. They've got 3 third-rounders and 4 fourth-rounders and 2 second-rounders and all that kind of stuff. And then we also hear a lot of discussion about, when you're going to rebuild and go into full rebuild mode. And to me, full rebuild mode, the Rangers didn't go into full rebuild.
No.
They changed on the fly. They announced that they were going to rebuild, but then the following year they signed Panarin to a $10 million deal.
Right. That's true.
And all they were trying to say is we during this transition we may not be as good. And I remember actually talking to another GM that was really angry over the Rangers, doing that. He said, they weren't, like, if you remember when they announced that, like, they weren't horrible. They just weren't a good team,
Well, they were going nowhere too.
They were going nowhere. They were on the treadmill, you're pedaling as fast as you can, but you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
And he just thought, it's your job as a GM to just keep pushing forward. And they weren't at the stage where you should hoist up the white flag, was his thought on that. But, a full rebuild mode is when you strip it down to the chassis, like Toronto did and Buffalo did a few years back.
Arizona's doing that right now.
Yeah, Arizona is doing that as well. And Vancouver, they get too many guys. So, they want to sort of reset themselves, but they're not in full rebuild mode. Right. Well, we've seen draft statistics, but some of the statistics I see I don't like because you define making the NHL and a lot of their numbers as just playing one game in the NHL. And to me, that doesn't tell you anything. Yeah. So I went back this morning and I decided I didn't want to pick any drafts that were recent because there's not enough time for the players to get in. But I decided that making the NHL was 200 games. And so I started at 2015 and I went back to 2010 and I looked at those 6 drafts. And I was actually quite surprised at if I defined making the NHL as 200 games or with a goalie, if you're in the mix to play in the league. In other words, if you're in the top 3 goalies in your organization.
Right.
Here's what I found. If you have a top 15 pick, the average number of players from 2010 who have played 200 more games out of that group.
Out of the top 15?
Out of the top 15. How many of them on average?
I'm going to say 3.
No. It's 13.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, because it's the top 15 picks. So, so 73.3% of the time, if you pick in the top 15, you're going to get a player. These are real defined. If you pick in the first round, this surprised me a little bit. You've got a 67% chance of getting a player. Now, again, I define the player as having played 200 games since your draft year. Right. So some of those guys have played 200 and they're gone, but most of them are in the league. And that's 67%. So if you have a first round pick, 2/3 of the time, you're going to get a player that's going to play in the league. And he's going to be, if you're going to play 200 games, you're probably a pretty effective player.
Yeah, you're a player. Yeah.
Okay. This is the one that surprised me because I had read that, or heard often that it was only 25% in the second round. But over those 6 years, it was 37%. 37% of the players played 200 games. Third round, it goes down to 18. Fourth round, 15%. Fifth round, 10%. Sixth round, 5%. Seventh round, you still find 4% of the players do play 200 games. But the interesting of all this is, to me is that how many players out of each draft year, and again, we're going back from 7 to 11 years. So that's a mature collection of drafts. Mm-hmm. The percentage or the average number of players who made the league with making the league
200
playing 200 games. And
average number every season.
So there's 210 draft picks. Well, not anymore, but back then there was 210. Now there's 32 times 7. So it's higher now. But in those 6 years, there were 210 draft picks. How many players did we get on average out of each of those drafts?
The whole league. So the whole league. Yeah. God, I'm going to say 37%.
It was actually 24. 24, but we got 52 players on average. And really, honestly, it's pretty consistent. Now, at 2015, and we're still going to get a few more. Not a lot, but we'll get a few more because some guys were at 180 games played and whatever. But that was the lowest at 44, and then 2014, 47. And then it got real consistent as you go back. We have 50 in 2013, 53 in 2012, 56 in 2011, 56 in 2010. Wow. So when you think about that, that means that when we hold a draft teams go in there knowing that the average will be that you won't even get 2 players out of that draft. You're going to get 1 point something players out of that draft. So,
right. And that's the number I heard too. That's why I went low with everything. And most teams would say they get 1 player every draft year that plays in the National Hockey League, becomes a player.
Yeah, I had heard 2, but it's not quite 2. It's between 1 and 2. So we spend a lot, and we spend millions to get those 50-some.
Yes, they do. Each team spends a lot of money, a lot of man hours flying all over the world to find us. But that's interesting to think about it. So all this talk then is made about the draft. We're going to retooling our team. We got to build through the draft, right? Wasn't Jimmy Devellano famous for that statement with the Detroit Red Wings?
Yeah,
he was one of the first guys to say we're going to build through the draft. Well, you're really not building through the draft, though, are you? If it's based on the
it's hard. Yeah. It is really hard to do that because you're not getting many players, and it's getting more difficult now because there's 32 teams. Right. Like, the 64th pick now in the draft is a 2nd rounder, but in your era, that was a 4th rounder.
Yeah, that's right.
So
that's great. I was a 6th round draft pick, so I was 96 overall. I think I was. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
now that would be a 3rd round draft pick.
Be a 3rd round pick. You'd have got more. You got a bigger signing bonus. So
that's interesting. So why are we making, based on those numbers, all this noise about building through the draft? Then it doesn't work. I mean,
I don't know. I mean, what I would say is this: we keep doing this because of Andre Palat.
Yeah,
Andre Palat was a 7th round draft pick for Tampa Bay, and Andre Palat is oh geez,
I got dancing here. We're dancing.
Andre Palat is pretty valuable player, and they found him in the 7th round. So I think that's why we just keep doing it, because you're going to hope that you'll get the.
What was Pavel Datsyuk was a 6th round pick, right?
Yeah, but see, I really just count the Europeans from that era. I mean, he was a while back because, back then you could find someone that no one else saw, but now everyone is scouted. Right. So, you can't pull the wool over anybody. Like, very few teams saw Datsyuk in the Ural Mountains. And but now, like, everybody, we've sifted now everything through a strainer, and, they all come out at the World under 18s, and like we know the top players when they're 14 years old.
I think part of the thing with the draft is too the way it's covered now on television. You get all the people like, this player's the can't miss player. All the analysis. Pierre Maguire used to be famous for that, for getting on and really knowing the draft picks. And the draft day was such a big thing. And I a former agent, have watched a few times where players and families leave the building that didn't get drafted, and they're in tears because they really thought they were going to get drafted that day. Well, you've covered it too. So.
Yeah, it's sad, really. And you want to get drafted, and then then it's an all new challenge. Is you got to make the team, and then it's really a layered challenge. So you want to get drafted, and then you just want to get to the NHL, and then once you get to the NHL, then you want to make it. Yeah. You want to get to the show. That's the second step. Yeah. And then you got to stick, so that's the hard part.
Right. That is, I know I've told the story so many times, but go back to my draft day, and I talked to Ron Duguay about this. I guess there was some players that attended the draft, but back then I was cleaning the horse manure out of a horse farm in Guelph, Ontario, my draft day, and the Rangers called my father at our farm, and he called the farm I was working at and said, "You've been drafted by the New York Rangers." And I said, "What do I do now?" He says, "Well, get back out there and finish cleaning the stalls out." That was my draft day, and in some ways, it was better because I didn't feel like anything had been accomplished at that point. I mean, drafted, but I was, I still, the Rangers didn't call me. I had to call them for a couple months after, say, what do I do? They were kind of outraged. They're like, get back out there and get to work, and we'll let you know when you're.
Yeah. I mean, I think today's prospects are a little more sophisticated in terms of, they have a better understanding of how it works. Most of the agents fill them in that if you get drafted, you're going to go to prospect camp and all that. And they explain that, they have a couple of years before they have to decide whether you sign. And that's another thing too. So maybe maybe there's 4 levels there, because you got to, first of all, you want to get drafted. That's a good thing. You want to be able to tell your buddies that, hey, I got drafted, and then you need to get signed. And so you want to be able to say, hey, I got signed. I got a whatever kind of bonus, blah blah blah. Okay, then you want to play one game, you get in there, and then the hard part. Then you got to stick. That's the hard part. And
that's true. You know what? You nailed it too, because I can remember going through those processes, and then I remember you got my first signing bonus check. They got a $25,000 signing bonus, and I thought I was king of the hill.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though. I've thought about this today. And sometimes you wonder whether the modernization is better. So, and I don't have a basis for comparison because I don't know how they did it in the NHL back then. But in 1960s, when I was growing up, the NFL, the draft was a big thing then, and teams didn't have scouting departments, or at least no more than a guy or two. What they had was you belonged to a combine. So the Detroit Lions belonged to something called Blesto, which is Bears, Lions, Eagles, Steelers. I forgot who the T was, and then there was a group of about 5 guys, and they would file these reports, and they'd send them off to the teams. Then you'd have all these things, no different than the central scouting, essentially. And then you'd use your one scout to, kind of run around in the last few weeks and check these guys out, and you'd probably get some film and everything else. And so the cost, and back then in the 60s, we didn't have these multi-billion-dollar television contracts. The cost was kept down. Right. But I wonder if they went to, and I'm certainly not advocating this because I don't want anybody out of a job, but what if they just went to central scouting, which you just had a couple of scouts, and you, instead of getting a 2 reports, you got one a month, right? And then you'd send your 2 scouts out to check out these players. I mean, would you do any worse than on average, 1 and a half or 2?
Yeah, I guess, and these cases are rare. Like Steve Yzerman drafting the young defenseman there, is it Cider or what is it?
Yeah,
Cider. Well, everybody, and I saw a feature on it, everybody's kind of like, what? You drafted him? Like everybody, no other team was going to draft him that high anyways. But they decided, particularly Steve Yzerman decided that he wanted to pick him, and it's turned out to be a wise choice.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, I guess I'm with you though, because most people, I guess there's exceptions, but there's more people are drafted where they're supposed to be drafted, where everybody assumed they were going to be drafted, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's always stories of, a guy pounding on the table saying you got to draft this guy, and he turns out, there's, for every guy who's drafted, there's one scout that he says, well, believed in me. Well, I'm sure that's true. Just like you, I find it, one of the stories that I roll my eyes at is every time, and I don't care what field you're in, where somebody has a story about somebody who said they couldn't do it, and I tend to roll my eyes at that because I don't remember anybody ever telling me that I couldn't do anything. People just don't think about it to say that. Why would you? How does that come up in conversation? You never.
Well, I do remember I was working for another farmer when I was a kid growing up, and we got talking about me wanting. I was a good little player in hockey. I was talking about wanting to play in the National Hockey League, and he came out and told me, he says, "You're not going to play in the National Hockey League. You're too old. If you haven't developed to a certain level at this point, you're not going to make it." And I kept thinking.
So you got the story too. So
I did. I can remember the day the guy was telling me. I was
well, maybe people do. Maybe everybody has that story, but maybe I was too shy and never had any conversations. But I'm not just talking about in sports, but everybody got some story about, somebody told me, you'll never amount to anything, and now look at me now. Those kind of stories. So
Larry Melnick tells the story on our show that some girl in school, when they were young kids, they knew he wanted to play in the National Hockey League. She said, "The only thing that you're going to do in the National Hockey League rank is drive the Zamboni." She told him.
Wow. Yeah, but it is interesting. It'd be fun to see. Someone should study actually, and have central scouting, or hire someone to draft 33rd overall.
Yeah.
Without going anywhere, but just using central scouting and everything, and who he would pick at those spots, and then see how those players do. And
you do, especially with all the technology out there today, where you watch all the games and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I don't understand, I just had this conversation this morning. I've gotten into analytics. There's certain statistics I like. We've talked about some of them on the show. I like goals prevented above the average. I think that it kind of illustrates how dominant Shesterkin is, because the average goalie, like he was number one in terms of goals prevented above the average. They look at the quality of the saves and so forth. There's a couple other statistics that I like too. Dangerous scoring chances, shots on goal really don't tell me much, but dangerous scoring chances when they're in that home plate area between the dots, that sort of illustrates like how tight your defense is. If you're the Boston Bruins giving up 5 of those a game, that's one thing. But if you're the Rangers in the playoffs giving up 14, that's another. So I like advanced stats, and I think they are illuminating. But I see now that we're doing that with junior kids in terms of and I'm sure college as well. I just haven't seen those, and they're using that to help them in their drafting. But are your analytics in junior? Does that translate to the NHL? Because when you get there, it's a whole different set of problems that you got to deal with.
Yeah, that's interesting. We talk about this because I was watching a thing on Prime Video the other day, a documentary, and it was can't remember the name of it. It's been out for a while. I've seen it before, but Wayne Gretzky, Pele, Jerry Rice, those three in particular, they were interviewing them about their great careers and the things they did, but they also talked about the lack of talent they had too. That if people were to analyze them statistically, they wouldn't do very well. They talked about how that's kind of held back some players, like particularly Jerry Rice talked about in football with like you mentioned the combine. Like if he'd gone to the combine, not unlike Tom Brady, he was drafted in the 6th round when he the combine, and they showed old pictures of him with his shirt off, how terrible he looked and everything, and how slow he was. But there he is, maybe the greatest players ever played the game. So I just thought it was interesting to listen to those great players talk.
Although analytics would have helped them. Now, what you're talking about is the rating of their physical attributes.
Yeah, you touched on drafting and scout and combine, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But in terms of it was pretty evident. Wayne Gretzky had great analytics, I'm sure, when he was.
But he talked about, and I remember this, that when he came into the league, there's people that were criticizing him all the time. He wasn't going to be not just a good player. They didn't even think he could play. He wasn't a very good skater. Didn't have a great shot.
Again, you're talking about physical. I'm talking about the statistics that he had. You can use analytics to show that players that don't have the physical characteristics can survive.
Yeah.
So
that's not very true.
Which he would have. His Corsi in junior was, I'm sure, off the chart.
Yeah.
And all that other stuff. So, but that's a different story. When you go to the physical combine and like we saw that, who was the player? I think it might have been Casey Middlestat, but there was a big deal about how many chin-ups he could do.
That's right. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
What bearing does that have?
I know that's what Gretzky said too. He says that somebody questioned I couldn't do any push-ups or whatever it was. I said he's never seen a push-up score a goal.
So, yeah, no, that's exactly right.
You know what? It's easy for those level of players. I can see that, but I'll speak for myself. I had to be in shape. I had to be, strength-wise, had to be strong. Was my game. I wasn't talented like those guys. Now, you could argue maybe those guys were no more talented than me, but they worked at it more. They worked at their skills more, where I worked on my strength more. So, but
don't you think it's harder though? I think you almost have to be a good skater now. I think it was in the 80s. I think there were some skaters that certainly couldn't survive now. So
no question. You got guys like Brad Marsh, who had a fantastic career. I mentioned him previous. And just a heart and soul guy. But if you watch him skate, there's no way he could play the game today. And maybe I'd be that same category. We've talked about this before. Hopefully we would have wanted it bad enough that we would have adapted and worked on our skating and got it better.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's hard to compare eras. It's hard to compare. Like Wayne Gretzky would have been the same player in terms of what he was trying to accomplish, but he would have been more physically stronger. Skating would have been better. He'd have gone to skating schools. He'd have worked on this and that. And, You know,
But it's funny though how he talked to that documentary about how he didn't get along with all his coaches, especially coming up, because he wanted to be that creative guy, and they wanted him to play like everybody else and bang the puck off
Right.
the ball and all that stuff. And he I guess he was mentally strong enough to just say, no, I'm not doing it. I'm going to go someplace else and play. And that's what he did. You know, he moved out of Brantford, went into Toronto and played on a team. Actually, I played against him when he was young, but to me, I looked at that age, and it didn't seem like it was his parents that were saying it. It was his saying it. Like when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, to be able to stand up to a coach and say, no, I'm going to play the way I want to play.
Yeah.
Yeah. I admire that.
How would you like to be that coach now today? You know?
And he was good too. He didn't mention any names, but he did say, in fact, he said, yes, there was two. Like he was very specific. He knew who they were, but he didn't mention any names. But
wow, that's great. Well, anyway, I think we've run out of time, though.
Yeah.
But we appreciate everyone tuning in. If you want to read me, I'm at DetroitHockeyNow.com and also at HockeyBuzz.com.
And if you want to listen to the radio version of this show, you can go to radio.co at 365 Sports. Everybody, we'll see you guys on Wednesday.